NASA sees a great future with SpaceX, so every move they make appears to be an obsession towards SpaceX. There will be many challenges in space exploration right now, especially with Russia. Now that President Putin has decided to continue fighting Ukraine, we should expect Russia's space agency Roscosmos to be the least likely to feature any space transformation in the future, because they're currently focusing on the war and venting all of Russia's resources to keep the military strong. So we shouldn't expect Russia's space agency Roscosmos to develop an elaborate plan that would astound the globe. Even if they do, it will not be while the current conflict between them and Ukraine is ongoing. Stay tuned as we expose how NASA gave SpaceX another contract worth millions of dollars. The deal has made Boeing Starliners feel inferior in any space activity they do. You'll also learn how the new NASA contracts would demolish Russia's space activities and reduce them to nearly nothing. Among many other space companies, SpaceX is the most dependable, consistently excelling in rocket launches and engineering. This is why NASA has placed its trust in SpaceX. NASA formerly worked with Boeing, but looks like they've totally given up on Boeing since most of their contracts have been pending for a long time now and their operations are not cost efficient. It follows certification delays for Boeing's Starliner spaceship. NASA planned alternate flights between SpaceX and Boeing and still intends to carry them out. However, Boeing has encountered technological challenges that have caused them to go behind schedule. Boeing and SpaceX were thus the only possibilities in the absence of a second commercial crew program. Boeing, whose Starliner spaceship has yet to complete an uncrewed test flight, has been excluded from this contract add-on. On the other hand, SpaceX completed uncrewed and Crew Dragon test flights in March 2019 and May 2020 respectively. It will eventually begin operational astronaut transport missions in 2022, making it the only feasible alternative. As a result, NASA stated that it would grant 3 more transport contracts to SpaceX, bringing the company's commercial crew transportation capability (CCT cap) contract from around $2.6 billion to $3.49 billion. According to NASA's Office of the Inspector General (OIG), as of August 2019, SpaceX is projected to spend $1.2 billion on research and test flights and $1.4 billion on up to 6 operational Crew Dragon missions out of the initial $2.6 billion grant. The contract includes missions Crew 7, Crew 8, and Crew 9. NASA astronauts will be flown to the International Space Station by SpaceX beginning in 2020, ending a long period in which NASA had no direct access to the orbiting laboratory with the retirement of its space shuttle fleet in 2011. NASA astronauts flew aboard the Russian Soyuz spacecraft during this time, while the agency collaborated with private partners to develop new vehicles. That meant that NASA planned to pay $230 million for the first 6 Crew Dragon transport flights, each of which would transport 4 people to and from the International Space Station and act as a lifeboat in the 6 months during launches and landing. NASA's contract revision calls for the space agency to pay the corporation no more than $890 million, up to $297 million per trip for 3 more transport flights, likely carrying 4 people. NASA will thus pay an average of up to $74 million per seat for missions 7 through 9, far more than the $55 million per seat SpaceX's first 6 Crew Dragon missions would cost the space agency. To be clear, there is a potential that a significant portion of the $890 million contract value rise occurred before the inclusion of 3 additional flights, in which case NASA may be paying about $700 to $800 million or $60 to $70 million per seat for 3 more Dragon launches. In any case, it's less than the $90 million per seat that Boeing's Starliner is slated to cost. After NASA's Soyuz ride-sharing operations, Boeing charged almost $90 million per seat to launch American astronauts on Russian Soyuz flights. NASA recognized in that notification that SpaceX is the only American corporation currently certified to transfer humans to the ISS at an affordable charge. Boeing was also awarded a 6-mission CCT cap contract from NASA in 2014, valued at $4.2 billion, although its Starliner spacecraft is currently in the uncrewed testing phase. Its next test mission is slated for May 2022, when it will launch atop an Atlas V rocket to rendezvous with the International Space Station. SpaceX will increasingly likely complete all 6 of its initial crew flights before attempting its first introductory test flight, a milestone Crew Dragon passed in May 2020. Is this the end game for the Boeing Starliner? Whether or not the Starliner will ever become operational remains to be seen. Still, its future is becoming increasingly bleak as Boeing's Starliner program leader, Mark Nappy, will soon retire from the company. NASA requires Starliner now more than ever, as the redundancy provided by Soyuz is no longer available. NASA booked 3 additional flights as expected. This has nothing to do with the cancellation of the Starliner. Starliner will arrive, which is a beautiful thing. Everyone rooting for Starliner to fail is essentially a communist who enjoys monopolies and despises the ability to pick from a variety of products. SpaceX is already exploiting the present exclusivity by boosting the price of each seat by 50%. Yes, it is still less expensive than Boeing, but it's still far more costly than it might be. And if Starliner is no longer available, the amount of money SpaceX may demand is limitless. With the recent mil contract price versus ULA, it's clear that SpaceX maximizes its profit. SpaceX overestimated ULA's capacity to go lower, and they provided pricing with as much profit as possible, slightly under ULA Atlas costs, because they assumed ULA couldn't match them anyhow. They were mistaken, and ULA received more than half of the contracts. SpaceX could have provided its launches for half the price that ULA proposed, but they were kinda greedy. So we already know what would happen if Starliner is cancelled. It literally means SpaceX seat costs would exceed $100 million, since NASA would not have a chance. The present just hike of 50% to $75 million is most likely a lesson learned from the ULA contracts not to underestimate the potential of others to get cheaper. It appears like Boeing is too lazy to get off the ground and move the world as they used to before SpaceX came into the picture. So NASA no longer feels secure awarding any contract to Boeing. Perhaps NASA believes Boeing doesn't have the necessary capability to complete any deal effectively. Boeing's difficulties began with a merger with McDonnell Douglas. That merger marked the beginning of the transition from an engineering company to one that is primarily concerned with the bottom line via outsourcing to third parties. Boeing bean counters have deviated from engineers' standards by selecting less tolerant parts for less money. Boeing as a corporation killed itself by relocating management east and acquiring too many incompatible firms. They used to be a fantastic company, but they have now devolved into a level of bureaucracy and dysfunction that affects almost all of their activities. They should never have allowed smaller plane makers to join Boeing because it would have diminished crucial competition. Boeing no longer provides any services that can be deemed reliable. Their operating goal is to postpone and increase costs until projects are scrapped. It's mind-blowing that they're still being handed contracts. They would have been better off utilizing the Apollo modules as a foundation and modernizing them to present standards. Another challenge has arisen for Starliner. The Atlas V rocket, a Russian-built first-stage engine, launches Starliner. In response to Western sanctions, Russia has halted further exports of the engine to the United States and technical support for the machines already in US hands. ULA should have enough engines in stock to support the contracted flights, but they will now have to keep them in flight-ready condition on their own without manufacturer help. As for Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, everything was going well for them, and we were expecting them to reach the moon someday just as they promised, but recently everything was pushed to the wrong side. When Russia's President Putin made the wrong and regrettable decision to invade Ukraine, Russia will be busy raising resources to take over Ukraine instead of developing a better strategy to improve Roscosmos activities. So Elon Musk and SpaceX are now on the field, ready to show the world what they are capable of. The problem that would surface here is that without Russia, the ISS would most certainly die on the vine, and SpaceX would be required to safely deorbit the defunct space station. It doesn't mean we can't have space stations. Still, the ISS is so inextricably linked to Russia and other international funding is so limited that it will be difficult to continue without them. Instead, there will most likely be a period in which we focus our funds on building a new space station without Russia's involvement and thus without reliance on them. So far, SpaceX has been able to build what was previously impossible and accelerate its path to success. Imagine discovering a brilliant solution through research only to find out that someone has vaguely considered it, copied it, and red-taped your ability to incorporate it. Do you think Russia would actually be eliminated from the ISS? Let's also keep an eye on SpaceX and Starlink's insane new plan to beat Russia. Just click on this video.